specific questions which you'd like to be answered when we have the Q&A at the end, you can put those in the Q&A box. I know many of you have questions about your certificates and about previous webinars. Please don't use the chat box for asking those questions. We'll deal with all of that once the webinar is over. So please leave the chat box free for kids to during the activities which we'll have during the webinar itself. Okay, so to begin with, you may notice that on the screen now, underneath the title of the webinar, we've got my name, but also my friend. Tony's actually an Italian surname. My dad was Italian, my mum is English, but I was born in the UK, I was educated there. Working in English language teaching for over 40 years. I work as education services manager. Okay, so what I'm going to do this morning is cover 4 areas and also make a conclusion. And the 4 areas I want to talk about are this move from teaching learners to teacher learning, the importance of contexts. I'm going to have a look at what effective teachers do, and end up by having
what does this tell me? Can you tell me what does this?
So, those of you in the this webinar, all you've got in teachers experience experience in different contexts, working with different age groups, teaching generally English, teaching business English, whole spectrum. And it's possible to suddenly have a position thinking, okay, I've spent a lot of time teaching learners, now I need to know myself as a teacher learning. And maybe also it's possible for teachers to pass on their knowledge and skills to other learners. So this is basically what we're going to be talking about today. How do we move from a situation where we have an enormous amount of skills and experience? How can we move into a different model where we deliver, we transfer, if you like, all of that knowledge and skills to other teachers? So I want to start with a photograph of my dear friend and colleague who's not with us this morning. This is Matt Hellman, and something that Matt said to me in a conversation 5 or 6 months ago when we started work on a joint project, and he said this. I'll just leave you to read that for a few seconds. So the point that Matt is making here is that just because you know a language doesn't mean necessarily that knowledge transfers into being able to teach it effectively. In the same way, just because you know how to teach, just because you have knowledge about teaching, experience in everything that's required to teach, that doesn't necessarily mean to train other people to teach. And it was this thought, this idea, this discussion that which brought our 2 heads together. Project, which is called Teaching Learners to Teach. We said in our project is that even if there are opportunities,
why we are more
consultancy for more job opportunities, and in particular for the MENA region, which is the region that I actually work in. And I've noticed an enormous number of work opportunities for teachers. And I'm investigating further, but I haven't yet seen a single so even though there may be contents that teaching trainers actually learning how to become a trainer, these are tiny jobs that going on from this point that Matt's made, even if there is an opportunity to learn train, maybe some of you today found that opportunities there that actually need to pass as well, not what opportunities, or possibly the guidance that you see is not sufficient. So yes, the opportunity will be there, but actually it's not expected. You're not going to pursue. Let's remember what teachers are guidance rather than careers. It's also true for training capacity, revolves, guidance, these reviews. So, if we're going to move from teaching learners to teaching learning, there must surely be things which are the same. There must surely be things which we can transfer from one context to another. And of course, at the same time, there are things which are going to be different. So, two questions, and please do not use writing for two questions are when thinking about moving from teaching learners into teaching learning, what's the same, what's different. So again, please, you don't need to write anything in the chat box, just reflect on 30 seconds.
Make sure that you already registered for in the LMS. If you haven't, okay, if you guide, so how to answer it? If you guide haven't been informed, does the sentence started with local name or also started
Okay, so you're probably
next
reflecting and thinking that yes, there are some things that happen in the classroom which can be moved into a training context, and there are other things which are different between the two. So I'm going to show you now 6 statements, and I want you to read them and have a think about them. You can this time, if you want, write something in the chat box, but we currently have, say, 2,500 people listening in on this webinar, so it's going to be impossible to monitor what you're saying in the chat box. If you feel you want to write something, please do. So I'm going to show you some statements, and I just want you to think about them and reflect on them. And I've put at the bottom of the screen here in italics that there are no right or wrong thoughts to the 6 statements. Everybody's going to have a different perspective on what's statements. So here's number 1. As I said, please, you do not need to write anything. This is really about reflection. I need to have the same knowledge about learning and teach students and teach teachers.
Why? Because we can nothing that was answered. Nothing would have changed if apples had stayed at home. That's how they would answer. Nothing would have changed if everything changed. Yes.
I'm just looking at a couple of the comments to see if you don't need to write anything. It's interesting. Moving from yes, absolutely. Absolutely. No, that's fine. It's the same as
Remember, we have formula
we do need to use it. Okay. The statement is saying that I
This
think
one
is
is very
a
well.
yes or
Was the story very well? No, the story is not. It wasn't. Okay. Remember the chunks that I'm using while communicating only sentences. Okay. The fifth one shortening, would you have, it's a question or shortenation, would you have had any exercise if you have been in active position? Okay, would you have had any exercise if you have been in active position? Let's concentrate on this part. If you have been in active position, okay, walking is active position? No. Okay, the answer is reading is your positive sentence. And when I ask the question, I'm getting a negative answer. Was Ruby in active position? No. All of us, if Echo has fault to the guy, okay, if Echo has fault to the guy, if Echo fault to the guy, right? Answer C. If Echo had fault to the guy, do you think he wouldn't have been so angry? And that and will be second sentence. I will put one reminders to go the previous activity of this lesson. I remind the channel. Okay. And I will give do not raise your hands. The current, right? Which is situation from right to conditional sentence using this forms in practice. So let's go the rules. Last time, remember, we are referring to act when we are talking about third position. Last night I wanted to stay at home and watch TV, but then all things invited me to the cinema. Okay, this is the situation given. And even the uniforms, if my friend not called or on watch TV. The sentence would be run this way. If my friend hasn't called me, and what I understand from the sentence, my friend called me. Or do I understand? Or the friend called and invited me to the TV. And how do I understand why I'm communicating about the future? If my friend hasn't called me, did my friend call me? Comma, I would have stayed at home and watched TV. Did I stay at home? Did I watch TV? Actually, in the uniform, it says I want to. It didn't happen. It didn't feel it. It didn't realize. Okay? So next, we're given about 3 minutes
is to expose the teachers to teachers to reflect. Indeed, it's not even necessary for teachers to read critically. What you need to do is have exposure to understand works. Statements for you. Here's number 5. Quite a lot on this one. Activity with teachers.
So, the second one. Expression when we got to the cinema, the film was sold out, so we decided to go for a movie.
Statement. Right after this, we decided to go for a movie.
So, what is the under situation here while expressing the first initial? If the film hadn't been sold out, was the film sold out? Yes. I would know if the same situation. This is how it is. And see, this is negative. Remember the opposite.
Okay, and I think for this particular one, you can see lots of questions. Yes. I think this is less contentious statement. Factual is somebody who's teaching teachers, somebody who's leading teachers. Understand teachers will be very, very
I didn't have any money, so I decided to go to the bank. So, did I have money? No. Did I decide to go to the bank? And essentially, yes, if I had some money, I wouldn't have gone to the bank. Here, I need to add something extra. Here in the steep road part, right after head, there is another head, right? And to have are
okay,
you
so
why is that? Can you write an answer in the chat box? Why do head are colonials? Why is it? Bubbles as a small answer for it. There's another one that you see. It says one for the past perfect, the other for past participle. Only smile to your right. Right? Right. If one of them is for past perfect, other one.
Probably much more important.
Other one is for
Teachers will know this.
Okay, we're suggesting great answers. Yeah, as Mama suggested, we're talking about the equals for past perfect. Okay, so all around or past perfect is characterized by had plus verb be. The had is already the auxiliary of past perfect. This had is the verb tree, past participle. Double past participle, the third form of all irregular verbs.
Alright, so we've had a look at
It's so natural, it's so normal, it's so ordinary that you have that's a good one. Because you're talking about
my context would be the situation,
that's all.
place.
Then let's continue. If I had some money, did I have some money? No. Or do I not? to hang?
In other words, the classroom is
Yes. If we haven't gone to hang.
so
And the way
classroom
it
is
hang.
no
This part tells me that we were on our way to hang.
things need to change.
The fifth one,
Words,
my
one class,
friend
one
bought
time,
a
not
kitten.
work.
If my friend
This
bought
is
a
where
Thomas, so I bought one
challenge
too.
days for us all.
I wouldn't have bought a ticket if my friend hadn't bought one too. Did I buy a ticket? Yes. If my friend hadn't bought one
Things
too,
you
it
learn
might
to
buy.
teach is this understand.
And the sixth one, my ticket was winning a ticket. My ticket was winning a
So
ticket,
we can
and
move
I was
students, we
winning
can move
a
learning.
Okay, so the answer is, if my friend hadn't called to ask me to go to the cinema,
So
I
here's a little
wouldn't
task
have
for you from
won a million
project
pounds.
report.
Did my
Tasks
friend call me to ask to go to the cinema?
together, and
Yes,
you can sit this week
he
to
did.
teach
I wouldn't have
you
won a million pounds. Did I
questions
win a million pounds?
Thank you. Again, there's no point in
I did so.
chat box.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Hopefully,
being but
this
really
is
just
getting
start and
everything
think
you
about
want.
it. First question is
So
might
what
be the main focus is that means
can you again this task for this activity for one? Think about three things you did yesterday, okay? And why the four things for each
Now,
one. If you think
two teaching
for
contexts may
each
be
thing,
different.
why the
Please,
thing?
can
You
you
don't need to do
understand
that
what
part.
it's saying?
You can ask, you can take notes on a piece of paper, then
My
we
job
will
is not to
convert these sentences into
consider teaching situations from the perspective of what to
how I told about all the days the student did. Yesterday I went to school. How was my day? How was your day?
I'm just going to give you 30 seconds.
If I hadn't gone to school yesterday, did I go to school yesterday? Yes. It seems I did. Comma, I have gone to the beach. How could that be different? How could the result be different? That I would have gone to the beach. Okay? Think about the things that three things that we did yesterday. Okay? Or let's change the way. Can you
Okay,
please
I can
present
see
from
quite a few people are
yesterday I
saying
went to the market and then I said
effectively is
that
better.
how can I
Okay, possibly, but I think as a trainer,
sound that
you
is
can't say
different?
that because how about a teacher
Okay, if I
is
had
teacher
I
A?
open up Google, I
It wouldn't be fair, would it, to say to teacher A, yeah, that's okay, but it would be much better if you were teacher B. That doesn't help. That doesn't support. We need to find positives
Okay, then
and limitations in both of these
I would have been at my
So
grandmother's
I can
house.
see lots of
We
things.
are still at his grandmother's house. Not then if I had gone outside to meet live for the first time, or if I had gone to school yesterday, I would be technical for a robot. It is great. It is a good job of saying it. If there wasn't current meaning, I would love to continue
It's important to
If the coronavirus hadn't existed, comma, we wouldn't have been here during the class. So, hopefully, you will imagine a bit past. If coronavirus exists, are all in online practice. So guys, you should that you are doing online practice and it's like this. Okay, so time to go to workbook. I'm trying to okay, let's have a quick revision while we have common interest. While we have 15 minutes left. Okay.
I think again,
To
depending on
format
where
first
you are and
conditional
who you are,
sentence,
there are
use
very
if plus what for
differences.
situation. If plus what. Answer
There's
please.
differences.
If plus what? Okay, no problem. Just add yes, no, right? Past perfect nouns for infinitive. Okay. If plus past perfect. Past perfect is simply done by using had plus verb 3. Remember the had situation. First had is for the auxiliary of past perfect. Second had is the third form of the main verb. What main verb? It says irregular main verb. So my sound, sorry, the sound,
So Charles is saying it's
my
actually
voice
impossible
is not
for
landing today, right? Ahmed, it is in your workbook. Let me see, page 68. For the situation in this case. Sonra, would or wouldn't, characteristics one, for example. It will pass the or the result part is the name for the
professional development programs to ensure teachers need business. And I'm sure many of you now have some sort of teacher training courses. Maybe you left your home country and you went to the UK. Maybe the stuff courses there. It's unlikely that you were not really position you see
wouldn't have what the things are thanks to you. Actually, in the lessons we are
my experience,
talking about
indeed when I did my own equivalent
of past
skills
that's why
years ago, I was
it's
teaching in London.
We use the first condition to talk about imagining situations in the present, future, or past, or what. And the last, we often use the first condition to talk about things when we not. We like it.
So I just want to pick up on one of the things that Charles says that teachers need to understand.
And the next exercise is setting up next sentence beginnings,
The question for
next
us then is,
sentence endings,
how can we actually do this?
two sentences, the next
How can you show teachers how to use context?
please do not write
Indeed,
anything
there
for
are
that
obviously
part.
going to
Please on your own.
Going back to what just there.
Yeah, we want to.
As trainers,
But we want to.
if we're training teachers on something like something,
For now, we will get
it's the main this is the idea teachers I'm actually lucky to be a teacher.
we read it, not to feel comfortable for example, you feel sorry for nothing the thing that you do that. Okay. For example, you cover that place. You want to do some technology for you. you hadn't
Us as
faced
trainers
them,
to train
they would all have been naked.
as we've seen. I think it's important to just remind ourselves
If the hero hadn't
that
faced them,
teaching and
would
learning
the hero
context
them?
provide opportunities for opportunities for
Did the hero save them?
so where teaching
They would all have been killed.
teaching
Would they all
students
been
usually
killed?
not always, but usually the teaching is control over where teaching takes
And the
place.
answer is okay.
Teachers we choose to do when it actually takes place. Control learns up. What we do have slight control is what
Right, third conditional sentence would say
in
the
other words,
song. Thomas
the
not end up
activities
in the
we
game.
engage
If
students
it's not open, the green is that the
so as a
conditional
trainer,
sentence
as a potential
because
trainer,
then
the
that
question
happens
is this: why is it important to stuff?
and this
What
is thought
teachers
is
do?
literal negative.
Because these are the things that we all have far more control. Where it happens, the midst of all this, as we see it, we do have some control over. Is more than what we have. Well, let's not be extreme. I'm not saying all the time. I'm just saying, in general sense, what we have. And this is what we also teachers. So this gentleman here, analysis talks about defining, trying to define what teachers do. He says this, he says how we define language teaching will influence to a large extent how much language teachers. So we can come up with a definition of language teaching and then analyse that definition. That's actually going to be intelligent. So here's the task for let's define language teaching. So I'm now going to give you 30 seconds, and in those 30 seconds, I'd like you to write your definition of language teaching. 30 seconds.
If Edward's family is Bella, if Edward's family is Bella,
Okay, great. Obviously, I've asked you to complete the task. Brilliant. So many of you some of you have been very specific, some of you have mentioned speaking, others of you
Chris guy is or not Chris. Chris would have died.
and of course,
Died.
it's a personal question.
If
There
or
is an answer
hasn't
to it.
Chris.
It's
If
actually
or
very
Chris
difficult to
was.
define.
If Angel not
But
with
let's
us,
get back to
she not
our
with
experts in
answer.
just
If
vowels
Angel
is
hasn't
in the
met us,
response to the
if
whole
Angel
task is to find language teaching
meet us,
in vowel system
yes,
to date. There's actually
comma,
no
she would have
precise
visited
mentions of
answer.
what constitutes language teaching. Very important to me in all settings. Now, of course, if you get sent to
We wouldn't have volunteered for the
training course,
because the
maybe
Sudan
this has happened to you in
hadn't
teaching, assessed, it's all evaluated against a set of criteria. So in the organisation, indeed, language assessment will have criteria for assessing. These are the benchmarks for language teachers' effectiveness. Language teaching is perceived as effective language teaching. There's no way these criteria apply in all settings. It's very, very context specific. Farrell goes on to say that indeed there are no agreed effective strategies that teachers situation,
What expectations I have, and that's the thing that according to my background, quite certain that if you cannot just only cannot change the role, let's direct to your home. Quite certain things happen about the story, use information given. When you bought a new car, you intend to go out for the day. So the reality is that they bought a new car and then they went out for the day.
It's very good for 30 seconds, but good ideas.
So how can we make
Ideas facilitating.
so that's your question. I answered the question. Teachers from administration online.
All of these are obviously
Again,
again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's impossible to say.
if we haven't bought a new car,
Accuracy,
if they buy a new car,
confidence,
yes,
that's what teachers do. But if you look at the
so much
research,
we wouldn't have gone
throw everything
out
into the box,
of
we
the
probably come up with
They
these
go out for
particular
the day.
attributes. First of all, an effective teacher is not just effective, they are highly experienced. I don't think you can be an effective teacher.
The time for the lesson is over.
Question
There is
is,
name it
how
for
much
you,
experience makes you effective?
There's one
10 years, 20 years. These are unknowns. Maybe
So that,
teachers
to wrap up, so first conditional, okay,
students
that's the last reminder for you.
maybe
If
the
what
teachers
has
board teaching.
your reading has parts for you, so where am I
The
able
teacher
to
will
find
results.
this aspect? So, of course, it's in the irregular rules.
And for me, one of the most
Comma,
important, and as I
we
said,
have
this
this.
is not exhaustive, it's not qualitative.
So,
If there
what
are
do
other
you
things,
do?
please don't feel
Use it or undo imaginary flag. And your honor is page 68 from your again, if you want to revise one more time,
just keep it with this idea so much about routines of what goes on in the classroom, because that's those routines is something you need to think about, just to worry about. If you're not bothered about routines, it means that you can reinvest your time to look at other things, to tackle other problems. So I think, in other words, what she's saying is that expert teachers are always working behind the scenes to improve their teaching, because we're not concerned about the routines of everyday teaching. Now, those of you that are able, think back to your first days as teaching. I can certainly remember my first day. In fact, I can't remember the teaching, but what I can remember is the planning. I can remember spending hours and hours and hours and hours worrying over what I was going to do in the classroom the next day, and preparing and teaching one of my friends what I was going to teach in the classroom the next day. I was my time and my efforts were completely invested in the routine of getting through those, I don't know, was it 45, 50 minutes? I can't remember, but it was certainly a relatively short amount of time that I was actually preparing for. And I probably put in hours and hours and hours of preparation into that one particular lesson. Of course, nowadays, and I'm sure many of you are in the same position, I don't need to invest so much time in the routine, and I can focus more on adding variety, if you like, into my teaching. Now, my friend and colleague Matt, who's not with us today, both of us are football fans. This is not a picture of Matt, it's not a picture of me. This is a picture of somebody whom we both admire greatly, Sir Alex Ferguson. You may remember him as the manager of Manchester United for a long time, and you may be thinking, well, why is he on the screen? Well, he's here because in his autobiography, he wrote this, and I think it's, I adore him as well. Somebody's saying they adore him. He wrote something which I think is very relevant for us as teachers and trainers. And he said this: so Sir Alex says that a true winner is somebody who's relentless. In other words, they never stop. The very best players, and let's replace player with teacher, they compete against themselves to become as good as they can be. They just have a built-in desire to excel and to improve. So effective teachers are not satisfied with just being effective. They want to be highly effective. And this is something which comes from inside. It's a desire to want to improve. So effective teachers then, remember, while they may have that desire, they're also going to need help in order to build on their experience, in order to become an expert in their field. And I think a question we need to ask ourselves then is the one that Weston and Clay mentioned, is that we need to be asking ourselves, how can we develop teachers into evaluative practitioners? And I've mentioned already in my talk that we want our teachers to think back. We want our teachers to reflect. And indeed, I've asked you yourselves to do this today. I've asked you to reflect on several things. We want our teachers to evaluate themselves as classroom practitioners. And only by doing that can we really come up with some sort of understanding of what an effective teacher actually does. And this brings me into the last part of what I want to talk to you about today, and that's teacher learning. And I want you again to reflect on yourselves as teachers and also yourself as learners, and just ask yourself some questions. Again, you don't need to write in the chat box if it's not necessary, but I do want you to think. So my first question then is, how have you actually learned your teacher knowledge? Where does your teacher knowledge actually come from? And as I say, you don't need to write anything, but please just think to yourselves in response to that question. Where has your teacher knowledge actually come from? And maybe for some of us, it's been very much learning on the job, learning as you do it. Maybe you were thrown in at the deep end. I certainly was. When I first started teaching, I was literally thrown into a classroom with not a clue about what I was supposed to be doing. Hopefully I've improved slightly over the last 40 years. Maybe for others that there was a period of training, a period of studying before teaching in the classroom. So these are things that we need to consider, where we've actually learned, where we've actually got our teaching knowledge from. I think I don't want to linger on the current COVID crisis which we're all going through. I don't know about you, but prior to a month ago, I had actually done very few webinars, and I suddenly had to improve my knowledge about how to do online training with teachers. And assuming that what I knew a month ago would help me for what I'm doing right now, this moment, it was something that had to be done differently. And I've very much learned on the job in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I've probably delivered, probably about a dozen webinars now in the last 3 to 4 weeks, whereas normally I wouldn't have done a dozen in a year. So I've very much learned on the job. I certainly haven't had time to go through any studying or training before doing any sort of online work. I think we also need to remember that all of us have spent, or all of us did spend, thousands of hours in classrooms as students before we began to learn how to actually teach in the classroom. We observed teachers, our own teachers at primary school and secondary school, at college, and this is what Lorty calls an apprenticeship of observation. And this, of course, creates a very strong sense of teacher behaviors. In other words, we observe the model, we observe the teacher, and we get to understand how teachers actually behave in the classroom. Of course, that doesn't mean that all the teacher behaviors that we observed were positive ones, but many may actually reappear in our own classrooms. But let's think about what we do now. What do we do now to learn more about our profession? What do we do now to learn more about teaching? Now, I'm just checking, and I think we've got just under 3,000 of you in the webinar room at this moment. So at least 3,000 of you are here in response to my question on the screen there. What do you do now to learn more about teaching? Well, you're here. You've signed up for this webinar. So that's a very, very good example of what you actually do in order to learn more about teaching. And I'm coming to the end now, but I want to show you one more footballer. It's interesting that footballers seem to have a lot to say about our profession. I think there are always lots of crossovers between different skills and different professions. Yeah, this is Ronaldinho. And Ronaldinho said, and again, in his autobiography, I think he's too young to have an autobiography, but anyway, he does. And he said this, that often a footballer, and let's change that for teacher, often a teacher doesn't have the time to think too much. It's instinct that gives the orders. And I'm sure many of you are incredibly busy in your jobs as teachers, and it's probably true that you don't have a lot of time to think about what you do. And there's something instinctive that makes you do what it is that you do in the classroom, and it's those instincts, it's those perceptions, it's those understandings of ourselves as teachers that we need to be constantly drawing on. Somebody just mentioned Bill Shankly, who was Liverpool, so I'm not happy with that comment. Let's move on to round up what I want to talk to you about this morning. Let's remember that not all teacher learning revolves around the trainer. In other words, what you learn as teachers doesn't always revolve around somebody talking to you, as I am this morning. And it's very important for us as trainers, and those of you in the room today who want to become a trainer or improve your skills, that we must never patronize our audience. We must never think of our trainee teachers as blank slates, because they're not. Everybody brings something to the context which we're working in the same way that every student brings something into the classroom context. So we need to be asking ourselves the question all the time, where else do teachers actually learn from other than from a trainer? And of course, teachers learn primarily from themselves and from their own experience. The important thing for us as trainers is that we get teachers to reflect on their experiences and to learn from them. So teachers will, of course, learn from their peers, from their colleagues, other teachers, other educators, as we're doing now, but also through reading and through watching YouTube and all of the other resources. But sorry to repeat myself, but I think it's really important that we just reinforce this point, that the best place that teachers learn from is from their own beliefs and their assumptions. And of course, these beliefs and these assumptions will be linked in to a teacher's own actual teaching experience. We're just about out of time, so I want to quickly conclude what I want to say to you today. I think overall, or to summarize, that the trainer's role is very much a balancing act. And what we're trying to do is to help teachers to think about three P's, not Jeremy Harmer's 3 P's, not present, practice and produce, but the personal P, the professional P, and the practical P. Those are the 3 P's that we need trainers to focus on if we want the trainer to help the teacher as much as possible. So the 3 P's are basically, the first one is the personal, and this is what a teacher has. This is the teacher's knowledge and their experiences, and all of those beliefs and assumptions. And these are the real foundations of how people teach. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all need to bring that to the context within which we're working. I'm jumping the second P to take us immediately to the third P, which is the practical. Because as I said, there's a very strong link between the personal and the practical. This is what teachers do. They teach based on their knowledge and their experiences. And as I say, these are the fundamental foundations of what we actually do. But those of you who are in the room now, 2,915 of you, you are the second P. You are the professional P, because you're actively thinking about research and theory and what other practitioners like myself, how does all of that impact on what you already know? So you're building on what you already know. And by putting those first two P's together, you will become much, much more effective in the third P, on the practical side. So yes, everybody, no matter what their skill or their profession is, you need the personal side. But what's more important is the professional side. It's what you're doing today that is going to make you a more effective teacher. So my final conclusion is just to say that there's no right or wrong way in what we're doing. There's no good or bad. I need to reinforce that as a trainer, you can never really know what it is that a teacher needs. But what we can do is encourage teachers to take risks and to look at change. As I said earlier, nobody likes change, least of all teachers, because the routines and the things which are familiar are the safest ones. But something that I wrote a few years back is that change in the classroom is always going to be difficult. So my advice from trainers to teachers and teachers to each other is just to have a go and see what happens, because there may be a lot of very, very pleasant surprises. So that brings me to the end. I've come right up to my 60 minutes, so I apologise if we don't have an enormous lot of time for question and answer, but I don't know, Sumbella, if there's anything that anybody wants to ask.
Thank you so much, Peter. What a fantastic session. Thank you all for your comments as well. We've been monitoring them throughout. Peter, you did have quite a few questions come through that I pulled out some of the ones that you might want to just speak to a little bit.
Sure.
One was about, can an amateur not be called effective if they do everything that an effective teacher, as per the presentation, does?
Well, we've introduced another word, which is amateur. So I'm not really sure I know what an amateur is.
I suppose she means a less experienced teacher, because one of the things was experience that we mentioned contributes to a great teacher. So perhaps this is a less experienced teacher.
Yeah. No, I would never say that an inexperienced teacher cannot deliver an effective lesson. But I think I made the point quite early on that really effective teachers have breadth and depth of knowledge. It's not a criticism to say that an inexperienced teacher doesn't know everything. Indeed, an experienced teacher doesn't know everything, but they know an enormous amount more than an inexperienced teacher knows.
Sure. Thank you for answering that. I hope that helped the person who answered it. And also, somebody asked clarity on the word teacher knowledge. So I thought that might be a nice one to kind of round off with.
Yeah, I think by teacher knowledge, it's your knowledge of what we do as teachers. It's what we do as educators. Knowledge can cover language knowledge, knowing what the present perfect tense is. It can be knowing what a particular word means. But it's also knowledge about what works in the classroom. What should I be doing as a teacher? What are the skills and what are the approaches that I need in order to teach an effective lesson?
Fabulous. Thank you for answering that. A lot of questions are coming through about becoming a trainer now.
Sorry guys, Peter and Sumbella. I think we have ran out of time already.
Raz, I think we could probably do a couple more questions. If people are not able to stay, they can.
If you're
sure.
Let's do a couple more, because it's.
If you're okay too, this is.
If you're okay, Peter, we are fine.
Yeah.
Okay, fabulous. So one of the questions is really, a lot are coming through that are similar to being, is it necessary for a trainer to be an expert teacher? How do we become trainers?
I think the first question do you need to be an expert teacher to become a trainer? Then, I mean, obviously depending on your definition of expert teacher, but as I said, I think if you're moving into becoming a trainer, or you have the aspiration, then you need to know what you're talking about. You don't want to go to a doctor who's not expert. You don't send your car to a mechanic who doesn't know what they're doing. And similarly, if you're going to be training teachers, you need to know. You need to have the depth and the breadth of knowledge, which I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah Al-Rifai has asked, is there a certain book you recommend for new trainers or for teachers in general?
Well, definitely the book that I've quoted, the book that Matt and I are currently working on, which will be published next year, early next year, so definitely that one. But actually, no, one of the reasons for writing the book is that there aren't many books. There is nothing out there at the moment which people can pick up and say, oh, this will help me to become a better trainer. No, there isn't anything, unfortunately. No.
Yeah, that's great. And then if somebody is dealing with teachers who don't really want to accept new strategies and methods in teaching, this has come up a lot in the comments. Any tips for that type of context?
Yeah, and I think it's quite a common occurrence that teachers are not willing to try something, and it goes back again to something that I mentioned. It's the job of a trainer is not just to show the teachers what. More importantly, it's why. Anybody can dish up, a whole host of activities that teachers can use in the classroom, but the good trainers will help teachers to understand why they should be doing that activity, the rationale behind it. And any training situation which is introducing something new to teachers should provide them with ample opportunity to reflect on that activity and to think about how they might introduce it into their own teaching.
Great. It's that's probably hit many of the questions on the head, because many of them have asked a similar thing here in the comments and questions. And then I guess winding down, I pulled out some lovely comments that lots of thanks coming from you all. If you're happy to wind up, Peter.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I really liked Alia Mahrous, who said, what is good with your sessions is that you open the door for thinking and meditating perhaps, about our teaching, and thanks for this. And lots are asking for your personal email address.
Well, it's public knowledge, so I don't have a problem with that.
So yeah, you can contact us. Peter's email address is there on the slide, and you can contact us at Cambridge MENA, as well at the email address cambridgemena@cambridge.org. And thank you so much for all of your praise and your compliments coming through. They're really wonderful to see, and we're so glad that this has been so useful.
Thank you very much.
Great session, Peter.
Thank you, and thanks to all who've attended. Raz, I think we need to put the link up for everybody.
Yeah, so everyone, lots of questions about the certificates. As you can see, there are thousands and thousands of teachers attending, so please bear with us, and thank you for your patience while we get your surveys and certificates processed. It may take a few days, so please don't expect them instantly as soon as you fill in the survey, but